Hello everybody and welcome to this video, the continuation in the series on an inspector calls. Everything you see comes from Mr. Bruff's Guide to an Inspector Calls, £3.99 at mrbruff.com or amazon.co.uk. So what I'm going to do today is I'm basically going to give you a sort of summary of Act 1, but in that summary I'm going to give you some analysis as well, so don't panic and think that I'm just covering the plot. So as you probably know, the play opens with Mr. and Mrs. Birling, Sheila Birling, Eric Birling and Gerald Croft all finishing a meal and celebrating the engagement of Sheila to Gerald. Now, the interesting thing about this is they pass the drink around, they pass the port around, and Mr. Birling makes a speech explaining how he's happy about the impending marriage, mainly because it could progress his own business if links were built with Crofts Limited, the company owned by Gerald's parents. And there's this quotation, "Crofts Limited are both older and bigger than Birling and Company. Perhaps we may look forward to the time when Crofts and Birlings are no longer competing, but are working together for lower costs and higher prices." It's surprising to the audience that there is no mention of the love between the couple. The whole thing is treated like a sort of business transaction. After the toast, Gerald gives Sheila an engagement ring, and it's only at that point that she says she feels engaged. And it's as if she needs the symbol of the ring, which is probably valuable, to truly see herself as Gerald's fiancée. This makes Sheila seem rather superficial, and we've got character analysis on Sheila both in the ebook and in this Inspector Calls playlist for more on that. Now, of course, Mr. Birling then gives this speech where he talks about the Titanic as unsinkable, and he mentions how the Germans don't want war. An audience, even at the time, would be well aware that Mr. Birling is very much mistaken at this point. Those living in Britain in 1912, as the Birlings are, would soon be experiencing the sinking of the Titanic, 2 world wars, and lots of strikes and unrest. So when Mr. Birling follows this up with the statements like community and all that nonsense, the audience are likely to think that he's again wrong, and Priestley has started to achieve his aims to make the audience aware that community is far from nonsense. Priestley believed a sense of community was essential if society was to become a caring place where people can live happily no matter what their social status. Mrs. Birling is notably absent in these early conversations, which reinforces her stage description from the beginning as being cold. And the first part of the play is chiefly focused on Mr. Birling, his lifestyle and his opinions. Now, the stage directions announce the arrival of Inspector Gould with a sharp ring, and Edna, the parlour maid, shows him in while Mr. Birling again emphasises his standing in society, saying, "I was an alderman for years and Lord Mayor 2 years ago, and I'm still on the bench." The inspector is unfazed by Mr. Birling's claims about his position and explains that he is there to investigate the death of a young lady who's committed suicide by drinking disinfectant. He's direct with his words from the start, and the nature of the death is shocking, which would surely gain the sympathies of an audience as well as the characters on stage at the time. The inspector is completely focused on the task at hand and sets to work questioning Mr. Birling, whose involvement seems to have started the chain of events which led to Eva Smith's death. Mr. Birling is told her name, he's shown this photograph, and remember, we never get to see that photograph as an audience. It's only the inspector who shows people one at a time, so it's not even clear whether they're all being shown the same photo. Now, Mr. Birling soon remembers that Eva was an employee at his factory, but admits that he sacked her due to her involvement in strike action over wages. He says he saw her as one of the ringleaders and still believes he was right to fire her. And of course, she's described with this following speech: "She had a lot to say, far too much, so she had to go." We see a change in Mr. Birling's mood at this point. He's no longer the relaxed, bragging character from the opening of the play. He's now forced to explain and defend the decisions he's made, and it's clear he's driven chiefly by money and status. He cares little for the lives of those affected by his actions. The inspector, unaffected by Mr. Birling's comments about his position of responsibility, requests not to involve his daughter, and soon moves on to Sheila Birling, who re-enters the dining room. Eric starts to comment on the proceedings at this stage, recognising his father's actions may have begun the story which resulted in her suicide. Gerald seems to side with Mr. Birling and can't seem to see how the tragic events from years ago could have had an effect on the eventual tragic outcome. Changing his earlier aggressive approach, Mr. Birling alters his tone, apologises to the inspector and tries to control the situation that way, but of course it doesn't work. Inspector Gould gradually reveals more about Eva's life. After she was sacked from Birling and Co., we learn that she ended up unemployed for 2 months, had no parents or other relatives to help her, and few friends, so she soon became desperate. It was then that she secured a job at Millward's department store, where she was to meet Sheila. Hearing what happened to Eva upset Sheila far more than her father, but she still doesn't recognise the girl's name at first. When the inspector shows her a photograph, again we're unsure whether that's the same picture that was shown to her father earlier or whether it's a different woman. Sheila is immediately upset and Mr. Birling leaves the room in search of his wife. Gerald tries to look at the picture, but the inspector, always controlling the situation, tells him that he must wait. So it seems that Eva was happy in her job at Millward's until a valuable customer complained about her and she was sacked. That customer turns out to be Sheila. It seems Sheila had tried a dress on that hadn't suited her, and while she was looking in the mirror she saw Eva smiling at the assistant, which had infuriated her. She thought that they were taking the mick out of her. So Eva herself had held the dress up to her own body, and Sheila had realised that it suited Eva, and she'd become jealous when she tried the dress on and it hadn't looked as good on her. So Sheila believed the smile Eva had given the assistant, Miss Frances, was a mocking smile, and furiously she complained to the manager. The store couldn't afford to lose the business of the Birling family, so they sacked Eva. Unlike her father, Sheila does accept responsibility for her actions. She feels very sorry for her contribution to Eva's difficulties and runs out of the room in tears. And next, the inspector explains how after her sacking from Millward's, Eva Smith changed her name to Daisy Renton. Gerald then reacts immediately when he hears this name, and it's clear that he's next in the firing line, although the details of his involvement aren't actually revealed until Act 2. There's then a reminder from earlier in the play that the previous summer Sheila hadn't seen much of Gerald and had become suspicious about his whereabouts, and he admits that he had a relationship with Eva, known as Daisy, but it ended 6 months ago, and therefore he thinks it had no impact on what Eva ended up doing. The act ends with Gerald believing that he can keep his affair with Daisy a secret from the inspector, and Sheila recognising this isn't possible. He knows, of course he knows. And the final word, well, comes from the inspector, leading us into the next act and the full story of Gerald's involvement. The word is repeated at the end of the start of Act 2 to add emphasis to it and keep the audience's attention on the mystery of Eva's life and death. Hope you found that video useful, guys. Give it a thumbs up if you did. Please subscribe to the channel, and most importantly, in the ebook there is a quiz about every single act as well, which you can take once you've read the chapters, or in fact just watch these videos.